Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News.
Nigeria's maritime sector has always been associated with official corruption, and agencies operating within the domain regarded as mere cash cows to sundry political interests. Just this past Monday, a former Director General of the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, Callistus Nwabueze, was given a prison sentence for allegedly embezzling the sum of 225 million belonging to the agency. This case brings up yet again discussions about stories of sleaze militating against the industry. We're now being joined by Abumere Osara, a lawyer who knows quite a lot about the maritime sector, to look at this particular issue and more. Welcome, Abumere.
Thank you.
Good to see you after such a long time.
Yes. Good morning, viewers.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure to be here.
But, okay,
thank you, Dr. Abati, for inviting me.
Thank you. Yes. Well, let's start with this perception issue about the maritime sector. I mean, this is not the first time in that sector that you have issues of corruption, indictment, conviction, and now you have also this celebrated case. Is the maritime sector all about corruption?
So it seems. I agree completely with the intro that the political class, as it has been under the military era, they look to the maritime sector as a forum or an agency to provide slush funds, as I would say, to further their own political or personal needs and interests, rather than meeting the laudable objectives for which these agencies were set up in the first place, which is to regulate the maritime industry, raise funds for the federation, and all that. But what do we have? You would discover that depending on who is in charge at the various maritime agencies, like the MPA, NIMASA,
Nigerian
Shipping Council, the moribund, we all remember what happened to Nigerian Shipping Line. It died, it was killed by official corruption, crass corruption, nepotism, sectionalism, sacrifice of merit on the altar of political expediency. You find a situation increasingly, if the DG of a particular agency, say MPA or NIMASA, comes from a particular section of the country, you discover that the main players occupying certain sensitive positions will seem to gravitate or come from that zone. Whereas the maritime sector is a specialized industry, highly technical, requiring competent personnel, competent hands, well-trained hands, devoid of ethno-religious or sectional consideration. But that's what we are faced with.
If I may interject here, there was a recent open letter that was published in the dailies complaining about unfair promotions at NIMASA. But the feeling in NIMASA is that changes are being made to make it more of a meritocracy, such that you must pass an exam to be promoted. It's not just about where you come from any longer. Are you satisfied by these changes?
Well, you see, it's one thing for whoever is at the helm of any government agency, not only the NIMASA, to come up ostensibly, to rejig the system, to reboot the system. But at the end of the day, when you sit down and look at it deeply, you discover that everything still gravitates somewhat towards satisfying sectional or regional or other interests, which is quite different from satisfying the commercial objective, the goal of government and the industry playing their role of revenue generation for the country. You have to remember that the maritime sector, if properly harnessed, can stand as the second highest revenue generating organ agency for the federal government. In fact, it's been speculated by some stakeholders in the industry that depending on the way it is handled and managed, well properly managed, it can even surpass oil in terms of revenue accruing from that sector to the country. But what are we faced with? Inefficiency, ineptitude, corruption, all across the board, right from time up to present.
But where will you place the blame? Where will you locate the blame? Is it corruption, lack of political will, or lack of synergy among the relevant agencies, the NIMASA, Ports Authority, the Shipping Council, the Ministry of Trade and Finance, and other stakeholders? Or will you say the problem is one of the absence of an efficient policy framework, legal framework, if I may use that word?
Well, now I'll answer your question from two perspectives. Now, all the areas you've mentioned, they all play their contributing factor to the malaise besetting the maritime sector. So also the question of laws. Now, take for instance the NIMASA. You find out that the last 3 DGs, they faced one criminal trial or the other. You remember the case of Omaseye, who was convicted at the trial court, but on appeal his conviction was set aside. Now, also Akpobo Kelemi, who is still facing corruption charges. The recent case of Callisto's Obi, who has also been convicted of grand corruption. You discover that if you read certain provisions of the Act, the NIMASA Act, you will find that it's the law itself that has more or less created the loophole and the opportunity for sleaze and corruption to take place. Now, the funds of NIMASA supposed to come from certain areas specified in the law. For instance, Section 15 says 3% of gross earning from freight in respect of all ships, inbound and outbound, they are to be paid directly to the agency, to be used to meet operational cost of the agency. Now, the main revenue accruable to the NIMASA comes from charges from that aspect, and they come in both in foreign currency and in naira, and it's huge. And the law says it should be paid directly to the agency to be used to meet its operational cost. Now, if you go further down, there's another provision that says that. So when you look at it, and then there's another provision of the NIMASA Act, which provides that it gives direction as to how funds accruable to the agency is to be expended. 5% of it goes to the Maritime Academy at Oron, and then 25% to the Maritime Fund. Now, the way and manner in which the Maritime Fund is to be dispersed is left entirely at the discretion of the DG of the agency. Now, you look at it. Out of the 100% of funds accruable to the agency, the law says, from the law, 25% and 5%. How it's to be expended is already specified. Now, what happens to the remaining 70%? How do you define operational cost? What tests are put in place to actually know what constitutes the operational cost? So it's left at the whims and caprices of the bureaucracy of NIMASA. So you will find a situation where they have so much funds lying at their disposal and to be disbursed the way they deem fit. It is what they say constitutes operational cost. So it is not a surprise, with so much funds available, that the successive officers seem to be having a field day, pilfering, as it were, those funds. perhaps the National Assembly may need to look at the act itself and put in place with a view to amending those provisions.
No, there are bills before the National Assembly for the amendment of the NEMASA Act, the Maritime Act, and the Maritime Shipping Act.
But we are not certain if it takes care of the lacuna that seems to be apparent from those sections, some of the sections I just highlighted. Now, the 8th National Assembly is rounding off this week. So what can be done? Has the law been passed? Will it even be signed by the president? Are there executive bills? Because what we see largely under this 8th Republic is that the tendency for the president to decline assent to bills, most of the bills emanating from the National Assembly. Even at times, executive bills from the president, when they are eventually passed, he declines assent to them. So we are not sure the nature of the amendment being proposed before the National Assembly. Perhaps, maybe they should set up some committees of stakeholders, and other persons or Nigerians, versed in the maritime business, so as to come up with policies, framework, and possibly amendment of laws in line with international best practices. Because from what I see, each time I go through the NEMASA Act, I see the loophole, so many loopholes in the Act, which tends to give room and create the opportunity for the officials, the bureaucracy of NEMASA, to have idle funds, as it were, at their disposal.
Well, still on the legal aspect, but from a different perspective,
yes.
What do you think of the judgment that was given in respect of Mr. Callistus Obi? He was given a 7-year sentence, a custodial sentence, but with the option of a fine of 42 million naira because of prison congestion and, those kind of factors. Based on the fact that the amount involved in this embezzlement was about 225 million naira, is a fine of 42 million naira not giving carte blanche to corruption? There was no order of forfeiture for the hotel that he said he built with some of these monies. What do you think of the sentence?
For the persons who are not lawyers, they may not understand why it went that way. Now, reprehensible as it will appear to be on the surface, I do not really have any quarrel with the sentence that was handed down. In a way, Mr. Callistus Obi cooperated with the EFCC. In fact, in the course of the trial, he admitted. In fact, before the trial, while the trial was going on, he had made certain reforms to the government. So the sentence of 7 years, an option of fine, I will advise him if I'm his solicitor to pay the fine and move on.
But in any case, the fact of conviction itself,
yes,
is enough punishment.
It's enough, indeed.
It's enough, that's
indeed.
the principle.
Yes.
And then the judge can use, his discretion to, play within the latitude that is available within the law.
Indeed.
Then I would like to ask you, you talked about the laws, the regulatory framework, but, the Nigerian government introduced the Maritime Fund, the Cabotage Fund, and then there's also the Shipping Act,
yes,
under which indigenous participation, is meant to be encouraged.
Yes.
What's the assessment of how that has worked out? Because it looks like under cabotage law,
even though the necessary regulations, the laws, they're in place to ensure that this is encouraged and is done, but it's not happening. And the answer to that is not far-fetched. It's what I take it down to what we call the Nigerian factor. Nothing seems to work in Nigeria. Nothing seems to work. No matter...
Well, Rice News is working.
Yes. I'm talking in terms of...
something that is working.
Yes, I'm talking in terms of a public sector. Yeah. Public sector.
Yeah, I'm just joking.
Now, you'll be amazed to find that if the maritime sector were to be placed in the hands of the private individual, private citizens, it will perform differently, be more productive, more profit-oriented. But I can understand the fact that of the security implication of leaving the entire maritime business in the hands of few individuals.
About 850 kilometers
Yes,
of
waterways.
Bight of Benin, Gulf of Guinea.
Yes, then several, over 50 rivers, and the rest of them. But in the interest of harnessing that industry for the benefit of Nigerians and the security of the country, so it's best that government retain its position as the regulator, creating an enabling environment, and then to encourage private individuals, business to thrive. Now, it's our hope, as time goes on, that the objective for which these funds have been set aside will be realized, particularly the Maritime Fund. You have to remember that when it comes to a question of disbursement, who gets what, when, and how, to which interest? Who do you want to empower? What are his business interests? And then ethno-religious consideration, you'll be surprised, will also come in. And then the maritime business is capital intensive. How do they access these funds? Apart from the funds from the Maritime Fund and then funds from under the cabotage law, how about from the banking sector? Where do they get the support and the patronage and all that? Unfortunately, so far, from what we see in the industry, that government have not been able to put its acts together. So it is hope that in this new dispensation, as the government is settling down, they rejig the sector, engage persons knowledgeable in the maritime. If possible, engage experts from abroad for the purpose of managing some of these sectors so as to make it work more productive. And then I want to advise that government should banish the idea of bringing back the national shipping line. It's doomed to fail. It will be throwing good money after bad money. So government should not look into that direction. But we just pray and hope that they're able to do something this time around.
Well, since you seem to think that deepening private sector participation and empowering private sector players will seem to be the good way to go. And we know that the problem is not just in the Apapa port.
Yes.
There's also problem in Port Harcourt. Yes. There's problem in Onne.
Yes.
Will you recommend that perhaps, with the crisis we have in the maritime sector, maybe Nigeria should hand over our maritime sector in terms of management to maybe foreign investors, as we have had the example in some other countries?
Ideally, that would have been the best thing to do for efficiency, efficient management, productivity, and then profit to generate revenue for the country. But in view of a security implication, government may not want to toe that part. For instance, there are provisions in some of these laws, for instance, the NIMASA Act, which prohibits non-Nigerians from occupying certain positions, for example, position of DGs and other positions in the agency. But ideally, that would have been the best. Because if you go to other, like Hong Kong port, Dubai, Amsterdam, Antwerp, that's what goes on. It doesn't matter the country the personnel comes from, so long as it's competent and he can deliver, and he has a track record of delivery, particularly in the Middle East and then the Latin American countries. They should be brought in to rejig the industry. They should be given free hand. And I don't think, if you actually look at it, I don't think it may have a serious security implication for the country. And I'm sure mechanism can be put in place to regulate that, to guard against any action that may have the potential of undermining the nation's security in future. My view is that the main revenue-generating organs, for instance, even the NNPC, I'm sorry to say, if it's placed in the hands of expert technocrats hired from across the world with some Nigerians, it will be of more benefit to us Nigerians in terms of revenue generation, efficiency, and the like.
Well, since you mentioned security, how is the maritime industry faring in the area of security, safety, and also capacity building?
Well, in terms of, we are not faring well at all. It's on record that the maritime water space in Nigeria is regarded as very risky, highly risky.
But there have been there haven't been no piracy incidents in the first quarter of this year.
Well, that's what is being reported, but we don't know what actually goes on. But the truth of the matter is that as we speak, the insurance industry plays a higher premium in terms of insuring ships coming into Nigeria, because the Nigerian maritime space is generally acknowledged all over the world as highly risky. In fact, the last time, there was a time we were rubbing shoulders with Somalia. There was a time we were rubbing shoulders with Somalia because the rate of piracy, in terms of how the Lloyd's list and other international maritime group placed Nigeria at the time, we were second to Somalia in terms of rate of piracy.
Will it be really correct to compare the Gulf of Guinea to the Gulf of Aden, in terms of piracy? But that's not...
yes, that's at the time. At the time.
But
let us
bring it home.
You didn't answer my question about capacity building. How is the maritime industry faring?
So far, is terrible. So, I'm sorry to use the word. Now, just down the road, Apapa, typical example. The access road to Apapa Port, to Tinkan Island, and to the Roro. See, the whole place is a mess. The traffic, the turnaround for trucks to get in and take goods out of Lagos to where they are needed is terrible. Now, and I keep on asking the question, there are several other ports in Nigeria. You have ports in Port Harcourt, you have in Warri, you have in Calabar, you have in Koko. For the life in me, while government policy concentrated the receipt of goods into Lagos, taking into account the exit routes out of Lagos and the congestion that has become of Lagos, which also has increased the cost of even discharging the goods, which also has a spiral effect on the cost of the goods to the eventual product users. So what I would advise the government to do is to concentrate in terms of a deep water seaport building. Ibaka in Akwa Ibom is begging for attention. Olokola in Ondo is begging for attention. The governor of Edo State, Obaseki, he's been on and on about building another deep sea port in Gelegele in Edo State. All this should be encouraged. Now, the benefit of having a deep sea port is that it allows a bigger vessel to come in. Because this deep sea port, you have depth of well over 35 meters. Now, with bigger ships, the more goods can come in. And then maybe that can reduce the turnaround period. And so government should invest seriously in capacity building, expansion of ports, not only in Lagos, but in other parts of the country. In Warri, in Sapele, although that's converted to a naval, in Koko, in One, Port Harcourt, Calabar, and then build new one. Akwa Ibom state government is quite ready to cooperate with the federal government in the development of Ibaka seaport. So that should be done, and also to provision of rail facilities.
Well,
for instance, in Apapa.
Indeed, Abumere Osara, you cannot be more correct.
Yes.
There's a lot that can be done in terms of providing infrastructure,
Yes.
Increasing efficiency. And there are other issues, delaying the clearance of goods,
Yes.
congestion at the ports,
Yes.
multiple tariffs,
Yes.
that block productivity.
Yes.
But, we wish we had more time, but we'll invite you again so that we still look at other issues that we have not covered. Thank you very much, Abumere Osara.